What's up everybody, trueeevil here, and today I'm going to be talking about how to do Cage Rumble Triple S using units that are incredibly low invested, and I'm talking about unlatticed units, 4-star units, 5-star units, a lot of rare units. We're going to be working with a lot of the lowest of the low here because sometimes, you just don't have 15 well-versed units, and it's more so important with this boss fight to know how to go about it and maximize the damage through mechanics versus just having raw overpowered units. So without further ado, let's get in on it. Now, before we begin, let's talk about the mechanics of these boss fights because I feel like a lot of people aren't utilizing to get the maximum score when they're struggling with them. And as you can see, pretty much really strong score on all these with the minimum invested units. The only one that isn't 1,000 is the Shadowflame Hoyan, and that is for a number of reasons. One, if I had any lattices invested in pretty much any of the units I'm using, then it would definitely be 1,000, but because resources are scarce, I don't want to drop purple lattices into, say, red Kazuyo right now. I don't want to drop gold lattices in the Colossus. It's just something I don't feel like is worth because we're getting the best amount of rewards possible. So just pointing that out there real quick. And if you just have a Lily, Lily will just make it 1,000 by replacing Lily with Kazuyo. So with the mechanics, the three big things is the first one is for every debuff inflicted, then the damage is increased and it goes up to 100%. So what this means is we want 5 debuffs on NicoNana at all times. So we're really going to be utilizing characters that apply debuffs. And Dot does count as one of these, so you can use a Fangus, even though we aren't going to. It's definitely an option for the DPS, as well as really applying those very specific ones, like say Freya's Nightmare, doing Rosa's debuff, just getting all the unique ones, as well as things that are going to help the boss, like speed down, defense down, attack down. We just want everything that's going to be juicy and make sure we can lay down the noise on NicoNana. Then for Sharon, she actually gets more damage taken for every buff applied, and this one's going to be a little bit difficult because Sharon can dispel, which is going to make it pretty hard. So we want something that can consistently apply buffs. We want to make it a little bit harder for them to dispel, say like maybe immunity to really help out with that, and you can get that with Cachi the Guard or Ling Luo. And then you just want to be able to get rid of her dots because that's going to be the toughest part in terms of surviving the fight. Now, for Shadowflame Hoyan, she is going to just take more damage the more times she's hit, but I would say that's not the important part with this boss. The important part with the Shadowflame Hoyan is to loop her infinitely and CC the minions, because the minions are always the difficult part with Hoyan. And because we are using 5 units instead of 4 like the Grim Pursuit version, it will be much easier to cycle your units by having specific roles, and we'll get there when we talk about them. For the units that we're going to be using on Shadowflame Hoyan, the first one I want to talk about is Kazuyo. Now, if you have a Lily, you're going to 100% replace Kazuyo for Lily, but since I don't have one, this is what we're going to be using, and we're using her for one reason only, and we have her at 4-star. If she did have some lattices, this would make this significantly easier, and we would have a much higher score because of the cycling that we could be doing. But, this guide is about how to get triple S with the minimum amount of investment possible, and we're going to be doing that with the skill 3. And if this was max lattice, right, we would have speed up on consistently, a lot more cooldown reduction and shell cooldown reduction, and just way more just like damage would happen. But, it is what it is. I think just putting her in with decent gear is going to be helpful, and the gear I'm going to rock with her is Time Weave to really help out with not having this, and I'm going to put a gigabyte. Now, I don't have anything on her, but what I am going to do is 12 Time Weave, 12 Swift Rush, and I'm not even going to really look. I'm just going to see, hey, here's my PvE Mia gear, pop it down, pop 12 Swift Rush. Don't want to really think about it too much, you know what I'm saying? Then for the next unit is going to be the star of the show with is the rare Cachi. Now, rare Cachi is really amazing because of his skill 3, which has push pack and a stun, which is definitely no joke for this boss. And then we're going to be pushing him back even more with the skill 1, and then because we're not going to have like a buffer unit that just like the roll is a buff, it's really nice that he's able to push up the DPS, which we're going to be using Ting, and then he's going to reduce the cooldown. So with Kazuyo plus Cachi, you're just going to be doing the ultimate on Ting all the time, and it's going to just boost your numbers up very, very high. So even though these units might not be super maxed out, are 6-star level 50, you know what I'm saying, you're still going to get a lot of juice. Now, I do have a max skill 1 and skill 3, and you're able to get all these lattices from the shops in the game, and because Cachi is a rare unit, they're the cheapest things ever, and you know, I would say it's definitely worth. Doesn't take that much farming to get. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but you know, I think you could make it work with just maxing out the skill 3 if you want. I just use Cachi a whole lot in-game, so definitely a unit I would recommend maxing here. Then for the next unit we're going to be using is Vice. Now, Vice is a unit I have maxed out because I use him in virtually all the in-game content, and he's just very, very powerful. Definitely recommend. And on the shell, you know, we're using Alicorn just in case if he just gets silenced so he can do some of his good stuff. Bramble so he can keep taunting Hoyan, and then Swift Might for, you know, just getting the taunt a little more, and this to maximize damage. Then, you know, the reason you're using him is for the heals. He is a healer that can push back and apply attack down. So just a lot of things good for infinite loops. So definitely the best unit to use as a quasi healer to maximize damage. So that's why I really like him. And for the damage dealer, we're just going to use just a normal run-of-the-mill Ting. There's nothing special about him. Just, you know, just damage and all that good stuff. Definitely a good unit. And then the last unit we're going to be using is Kloss. My Kloss isn't like necessarily the best, right? I have no lattices in her. She's just there to use the skill 3 and just boom, boom, boom. And we need a defense down and a speed down, and I just think she's the best course. Now, I think a lot of people used her on the selector this weekend, so definitely a unit I think is worth maxing. You don't need her 6-star level 50. I think 5-star level 45 is perfectly fine. And then for the modules, I would recommend going 12 Swift Rush on her. I just have this because, well, it was my PvP build before the loadout switch, and I just haven't really switched it. You know, it is what it is. Definitely just want her as fast as possible to cycle as much, and that's the Shadowflame Hoyan team. So the first side we're going to talk about is the Shadowflame Hoyan side. How we're going to do this is that we're going to have Cachi do the stun on his skill 3, which has a pushback, and then the Vice is going to push back, and then Kloss with the speed down, and then Kazami Kazuyo giving the speed up and reducing the cooldowns. And what this is essentially going to do is just push the boss back, push the minions back, and the reason we have Codex on the Cachi is so that in case if there's just like an RNG stun that doesn't go off, we are able to secure the 2 suns. And with all this pushback, we're able to push pretty much everything back for at least the first 2.5 minutes. And this is with unlatticed. And if you have, say, a max skill 3 with Kazami Kazuyo or a max S3 with Kloss, then you're going to be able to push this back pretty much forever. So that's really, really nice. And Ting is going to work well because of Cachi's skill 2. He's able to give that attack up to him, push him up, and make it so he's doing more ultimates. So really, really strong cycling team for this side, especially on a budget. Now, of course, it would be better to have Lily than Kazuyo, but I don't have Lily on my account, and I think it's best to just know that even without a whole lot of lattice investment, this team is going to work, which is really nice. We have the Kazuyo at 4 stars and the Cachi at 5 stars. And the only reason my Vice is 6 stars is because I use him for pretty much everything in the late game boss modes. So this is how this side's going to be really strong. And as you can see, Vice is all you need for heals. For the NicoNana side, the unit I'm using for my speed up unit for that universal speed up, you can use Tsukio, or if you don't have Tsukio, you can use Nell. Now, I am building my Nell up. I really like her for PvE content because of the vulnerable. Vulnerable plus defense down is just very strong. So definitely worth building her up, and she has a little bit of heal here and turn meter push up. So just really good being used as that speeder, quasi healer, just really great all around support. Definitely a unit you want to try building up for a lot of these PvE content. So definitely would recommend latticing her up a little bit. Now this is a little bit excessive, but you know, I'm planning on using her a lot because I don't have Lily, so that's why. The next unit we're going to be using is Sybil. Now the reason we're using Sybil is because she's a DPS that can use defense down. That way we don't need to use a unit that is like a support unit to apply the defense down. We just have like an actual damage dealer that can do it really consistently, and this is important because this is a contest on how to do the most damage in the short amount of time that we have. So having a DPS on the color that can apply this debuff is really important, so definitely would recommend having that Sybil. Then for the other units we're going to be using, we are going to be using a unlatticed Rosa. Now the reason we're going to be doing this is because we get speed down with her skill 3, but more importantly, they just buff Golden Lion with the last balance patch, and it makes it so this is just a real monster. It makes it so you're just doing a whole lot of damage, and since Rosa is one of the best characters in terms of applying the stacks of this, you're going to be getting this fully built within the first 30 seconds. So definitely a super nice thing to have. Definitely going to be super helpful for clearing a lot of this content. Then for the debuff and healer, we're going to be using Freya. Since we don't have a true healer, we are relying pretty much solely on Nightmare to be the thing that heals us. And then it's just nice to have Dreamweave because not only do we have the defense up, but because there is a chance to get stunned in this, it's nice to have Dreamweave so we don't get stunned, because, you know, you get stunned, something happens, and it could cause a wipe. So really, really strong to have that happen. And then the last unit I'm going to be using is, you do want to have some type of Despeller to get rid of the speed up to maximize damage, as well as the attack up. Because with the attack up, NicoNana might be able to actually knock out some of your units. And there's a couple of choices. You can use a Viper. The problem with Viper is he doesn't have a lot of damage. So I opted to use my Holden, and it feels a little bad saying that because I did say this was a minimum investment guide. And, you know, it is what it is. I assume a couple of you are going to have invested characters for this game mode, right? I assume you're going to have at least one character built in this game, and my character is Holden. He's arguably one of the best units in PvP, so I maxed him out. Definitely a very powerful unit, but Viper will work, and Viper will give you a 1000 score with all the units I've already said. You don't actually need this Holden. I'm just using him because he's pretty built. For the NicoNana side, you're going to really see how powerful Nell is, applying that vulnerability alongside Freya's specific Despell, which is the Nightmare. Unfortunately, we didn't get the Nightmare off there, but you know, there is always RNG. But we do get this debuff down with the Rosa specific, and then Sybil with the defense down. And there's just so many debuffs that you're going to get the 5 to get that 100% increased damage, and you know, it's just going to keep going up and more and more. So definitely going to have all of the debuffs to get the 100%, but more importantly, you're going to also have speed up. You're going to have speed down to really make it so you're doing the most damage to NicoNana, and Holden is going to be here to make sure that when he does get that speed up buff, it is able to get dispelled. And because you're getting rid of the attack up and the speed up buff, it means that he's not going to do that much damage. So even though we don't have a real healer with using only Freya and Nell's S2, it's enough to be able to do this game mode very efficiently. So this is why I think this is a very powerful team to use for this game mode. It's definitely going to get over that 1000 score, and the good thing is you don't need any lattices in the Rosa, which is very nice and pretty much minimum in everyone else. For Sharon, Sharon's going to be the hardest part of this fight in my opinion, because Sharon dispels the buffs and it makes it hard to have 5 consistent buffs. So we're going to need to use units that can apply the most amount of buffs possible. And the first one we're going to talk about is Chiaki the Echo, and she applies a ton of buffs due to her passive, just applying it to random units whenever she has a turn, and then she boosts the turn meter and gives attack up. And even though we might not be using units that need attack up, it's just nice to have more buffs, right? Because even though the buff only gives you an attack up, well, it also gives you a 20% damage increase. So you got to think of it like that. And since attack up and Ave Maria can be just applied like crazy, definitely a really powerful character. Now, I don't have her latticed at all, and it would definitely, any lattices in Chiaki the Echo just make her a lot better. So if you can lattice anything into her, go ahead. If you really want to use her, I don't really use her that much, so definitely not going to do that. I will probably later after I build every character I need for PvP, but that's going to be at a later date. Now, for the module and chills, as you can see, I have Supernova, and that's because, this is a week-long event, and are 2 week long actually, and I just don't want to switch my stuff around, right? So I just, I slammed the shell that I don't really need on a character, and I gave it 12 Swift Rush. I could give her 12 Time Weave 2, and it would definitely help out with the score. But, we're going to get over 1,000, so don't need to worry about that. If you are struggling a tiny bit, definitely would recommend 12 Time Wave, 12 Swift Rush. But, that would take time to switch out the gear. And, I'm trying to get my dailies done as quick as possible, so not going to worry about switching gear around. Then for the DPS unit, we are going to be using Fangus with Golden Lion, as I talked about with other units. Golden Lion is just really amazing to use in this video game right now, and it's just really going to be utilized really effectively with Fangus to deal the most amount of damage possible. And due to that, we are going to go with this Keen Eye Onslaught Fury Edge build, and the reason we're doing that is because, well, first off, dots don't really do anything in Cage Rumble, even if you can apply dots to them, like, say, NicoNana. The important part is that we're using this for damage. And you might think it's weird that we're using Fangus for this particular boss and not, say, like the Shadowflame Hoyan, but what I've come to experience is that the speed down, although it can't be applied to Sharon, it can be applied to the minions, and it means that they are applying much less dispel, and it's just going to keep your buffs on for longer. And, he does insane damage, and he's red versus green. Just really, really strong DPS, and it's kind of weird using him without even thinking about dot, but it feels really nice. Definitely would recommend that. Then for our other units, I am using the rest as like sort of juiced up units, but I don't really recommend some of these units. And I don't think anyone's going to have a very powerful Rahu. I don't think anyone's going to have a max lattice Doki, which is like the most powerful stuff on my account. And because I'm using Doki, I'm using Fushu on this side, which I can only recommend using her if you have Doki. And these aren't actually things that I would recommend. What I am going to recommend and what will help you in this fight, it just requires some lattices. If you are trying to look for some minimally invested units, then the best ones are actually Dorothy the Wisher. The reason Dorothy the Wisher is so good is because she acts as that healer using life leech and crit rate, and then she can give crit damage and just push up your characters to attack out the wazoo. This works really powerful with Rahu or just generally any red DPS that you want to use for this job. She is very, very powerful. Definitely would recommend, and you can also use Cachi the Guard, even though that we're going to be using Ling Luo for that immunity, just because, you know, the dots do a ton of damage, and we want to make sure our units survive the entire battle. But, you know, if you don't want to use Ling Luo, Cachi the Guard is perfectly fine. It's just, you know, he takes some resources, and honestly, I haven't been impressed with him. Now, a lot of people really like him, but since we're getting the defense up from Rahu, it just kind of makes it so he's not needed that much. And it may seem weird saying that because he does extend the buffs. The problem with that is, well, they get dispelled. That's not the problem isn't having 5 buffs. The problem is having 5 buffs that stick. So even though he does extend, it doesn't really help the problem that much. So that's why I'm not really recommending him, but you can. And then you can use Bayantin to maximize the damage, but with her, you kind of want to have some of these invested in. Like for here, you want to have this at level 4 most of the time if you're trying to do the most damage as possible, and you know, we're not doing that. So definitely just some extra units to throw out. So let's like watch the Sharon fight and see how it goes. For the final side I want to talk about, it's going to be the Sharon, because this one is probably going to be the most difficult for a lot of people, because with Sharon, the hardest part is that even though it's really nice that with 5 buffs we get a 100% damage increase, the problem with Sharon, of course, is she dispels, which makes it really hard to keep the buffs going. So what I like to do is I like to have Ling Luo because of the amount of Whale's Prayer she can provide and immunity. Definitely really helps just layer it on. You can also use Cachi the Guard if you want to, just because, well, this is a really tough fight to survive. I think this is the toughest side, I think, in my opinion. So it's nice to have the healer, whereas all the other sides don't have a true dedicated healer. I think Ling Luo works perfect, but you can just use, say, Valerian, who's going to give a lot of buffs. But I do think if you use Valerian, it makes it a little bit hard because you can't use someone like a Doki Doki to the fullest advantage. And as you can see, the Chiaki is only really here to provide that turn meter increase and to give the attack up. The best thing with her is her passive also gives attack up, and she's giving that Ave Maria, which means they can't be pushed back, and it just gives you more buffs. And as you can see, pretty much we're always sitting at 3 to 4 buffs, which is pretty good for this fight. Now, you can do more with other characters. There are other options. They just require more lattices. For example, Dorothy the Wisher is extremely powerful against Sharon and can really help you get that high score, but you know, this guide isn't about getting the best score, it's about doing it with the minimum investment possible, and as you can see, Chiaki doesn't have that much investment. Also, you may think it's weird that I have Fangus on this side and not the NicoNana side, because Fangus can't apply the speed down to Sharon, but he can apply the speed down actually to the side minions, and that's really important because those are the ones that apply dispel. So keeping them at a minimum is going to really help the score. And as you can see, I have Supernova on Chiaki because I'm going to be honest, guys, I just care about getting the 3K. And I think that's what a lot of people care about. So just do whatever you have. Slap 12 Swift Rush on her and call it a day. So there is my guide on how to do Cage Rumble SSS with very minimally invested units. If you are having any struggles with this, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try to work the best on getting back to you with how to help, or if you need, say, like a substitution. I did mention some substitutions throughout the video, but if you want a very specific thing, feel free to ask. So see you guys next time.